Well, hello there. My name is Matt Edmondson and welcome to What's the Story? A podcast where we hear stories about faith and courage from everyday people, and today we get to converse with the beautiful Anna Kettle about what it's like to live with the challenges of miscarriage and motherhood. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Crowd Church, which is an online church. You know as well as I do that, church is not always a building that you can get into, and it might not even be a place you actually want to go to. And this is where online church works really, really well. It is super accessible. It is a safe space to explore the Christian faith. And the thing that I absolutely love about Crowd is that it is online first, which means it talks with you and not just at you. That's right, you can join in the conversation if you want to in the comments and the live stream. You can ask questions, you can share your stories, and regardless of where you are at on your faith journey, I think it's worth checking out. So head over to www.crowd.church, or you can email me directly at matt@crowdchurch with any questions. Now, before I get into today's conversation, I just want to mention a few links that would be worth checking out. The main one being, what does the Bible say about grief, which is a talk Anna did for Crowd Church a few months ago. Ties in so well with Anna's story, which she is going to share with you today. Just head over to the Crowd Church website and you can get access to that talk for free. Now, Anna is a slow living advocate, learning on the job. She is a recurrent miscarriage warrior, a lover of books, coffee, and good conversation. And she's a big believer in the healing power of words. She is a co-founder of Space Miscarriage and Infertility Network, which provides peer support to women affected by those issues. Anna, when she's not crazy busy, is also a co-host, a regular co-host here on Crowd Church. And she's also, because, she's found the time somehow in the midst of all this to write a book. She is the author of Sand Between Your Toes, Inspirations for a Slower, Simpler, More Soulful Life. It's a devotional book all about learning to rest in God, and definitely one that you should check out. Now, all that aside, like I say, all the links, everything will be on the show notes. Just go over to the website at Crowd Church and you'll find that. But without any further ado, here's my conversation with Anna Kettle. Welcome to Crowd Stories with me, Matt Edmondson. This is one of those things I just love to do. I just love to sit down and chat with people and find out what makes them tick, find out about their life, about their story, and today we get to chat with the beautiful and talented and all-round good egg, which is Anna. Anna, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, that was a great introduction, and I love chatting to people and talking about stories as well, so we're on good ground here.
We're going to get into it, aren't we? We're going to get into it. Now, it has to be said, Crowd Stories is a relatively new thing we've started doing, where we start to just dig into people's life story and their faith story. If you are new here or you're not sure what Crowd is a church. We're an online church. And if you want to know more, check out crowd.church. All the information is there, basically. Now, today, Anna, we're going to chat to you because you've been involved in Crowd. This is our second attempt, by the way, at recording this interview, so hopefully this one's going to go a little bit better. In the first attempt, we figured out that you'd been involved with Crowd since the summer of 2021, right? That's when we think you started. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah. Do we just need to clarify that this isn't a second attempt because we were awful. It was just internet problems. But yeah, it's been about 6 months, I think.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. That's actually quite a useful bit of information. Yes, we're starting the second attempt because Anna bored us in the first one. She's going to make it much more interesting. No, that's not what happened at all. So actually, it wouldn't be you that would be the boring one. It would be me, and I'm very well aware of that. So yeah, internet issues, as they say. Now, so you've been in Crowd since during the summer. And we seem to be slowly sucking the life out of you and getting you more and more involved. What started out as a little talk a while ago has just sort of morphed into hosting and all kinds of things. And I said, I don't know if you heard me actually in our first time, one of the things I said to you was, I know you're starting to feel more comfortable with the hosting thing because the last time we hosted a couple of weeks ago, you actually made fun of me whilst we were doing the live stream, and I thought, that's awesome. She has settled in. The jokes are now starting to flow. So that's normally how we define it. So it is, let me tell you, it's brilliant having you on the team here at Crowd. Great having you host, and I love your talks. In fact, last Sunday we played your, at the time of recording, we played your What Does the Bible Say About Grief talk, which I thought was extraordinary. And in that, you talked about a whole bunch of stuff that I want to get into, you know, the miscarriages and all that sort of stuff. But before we do, let's give folks a bit of background to Anna Kettle. Dun, 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 dun. I need one of those dun, 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 dun music.
You do. You need some sound effects.
I do. I really need that. Maybe we could do that in post-edit. Dun, 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 dun. So let's just sort of briefly touch on the Anna Kettle story, especially your Christian story, right? Here you are. How did you sort of find your way to Christ?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I grew up in a Christian household. In fact, I'm a pastor's kid. So
a PK.
Kind of just always a PK. I've just always been around Christianity. You know, always went to church as a kid, Sunday school, went to Christian schools for a few years. It's so youth groups as I got older. It's just always been there in the backdrop of my life. I think it would have been hard not to be, coming from the sort of family I came from. But I suppose it was really kind of coming to university in Liverpool at age 18, where it was sort of like the first time I had to kind of decide that I wanted to be a Christian for myself, rather than just like going with the flow, because that was the culture of the family I grew up in. So that was quite a formative time in my faith, where it was like, do I believe what I believe because I really believe it? Or do I believe it just because it's there and it's, you know, kind of always been there, and that's what I've been told and brought up believing? So yeah, that was quite a key time for me. And I think I went into halls of residence and spent some time just living with people who obviously were brought up quite different to me, weren't brought up as Christians, and just kind of really got up close and personal, I guess, with like other friends and people that were living around that had quite messy lives in lots of different ways, and started to realise that actually the foundations I had were really good and actually made sense of life in a way that other people around me couldn't always manage to do. And yeah, so I think those were quite formative years, because it made me realise, yeah, this faith thing, it really works. It works in the real world. It's not just a nice theory. It makes sense. And and then kind of post-university, I stuck around in Liverpool. I got involved in student work for a few years in my local church after I graduated. And then I went into a career in marketing, which is what I trained to do, really. I did a degree in English and communication studies. So the plan was always to do something like journalism or something to do with the media. I went into marketing and PR and spent a number of years working for big agencies in the Northwest and spending a lot of time with clients in London. Worked for Department of Health and a number of different government departments for a few years on campaigns, and just kind of cut my teeth on that in my 20s. And then kind of spent my time kind of split for a few years between London and Liverpool, actually, in terms of work. And that's eventually where I met my husband as well, kind of working to and fro from London. He's in the southerner as well, and is from Surrey.
And we'll forgive him for that.
At the time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So the thing that you mentioned there that I just wanted to pick up on briefly is you grew up at what we call in the church a PK, right? A pastor's kid. You grew up the child of a pastor, and you do hear some really interesting stories from PKs, right? Pastors' kids. Sometimes they grow up with really vibrant faith. Sometimes their church is the furthest thing away. They don't want anything to do with the church. You seem to have gone to university with, a faith which you've had to sort of, as everyone does at uni, figure out who they are a little bit. So I'm guessing your experience growing up as a PK, was it good? Was it bad? Was it was it okay? I mean, how, compared to what other people go through, what was yours like?
Yeah, I mean, I think my childhood was good. I don't think, I certainly didn't have to go through any major traumas or major difficulties. I think, I kind of had a fairly level childhood and no major dramas in it, really, in terms of, yeah, I mean, I suppose being a pastor's kid means that sometimes you're kind of a bit on a pedestal, not a pedestal, that's the wrong word, but you're kind of, more's expected of you. Do you know what I mean? In the church community sometimes, and this can be quite a bit of pressure. But I don't know. I think we went to quite a big church, and I don't know. I guess I just had good friendships and was quite well grounded. I was the oldest of three daughters, and I think I went a bit under the radar because I had other friends who were also pastors' kids, and also I had like younger sisters who were maybe a bit naughtier. So I don't know. I always did quite well academically and just sort of breezed through life. I certainly wasn't perfect by a long shot, but I think
my younger sisters were a bit naughty.
There was just no major dramas, and I don't think I had it as difficult as some people do. And I also just think I think some of it's about personality. Like some people don't mind that scrutiny that comes with being a pastor's kid, or don't mind that kind of your parents basically shared around everybody in the church. Some people do, and like that's just what I grew up in, and I'm quite a sociable person. I didn't mind it, but I can imagine for some personalities that would be really difficult. So maybe it's partly that. Maybe my parents were just fairly reasonable. I don't know.
I've not actually met your parents, but I'm sure they're very reasonable. They've raised a beautiful daughter, so I'm sure they're very, very good people.
They are. They are very good.
Yeah, I can imagine. So uni was quite formative for you. You went to university, you figured out, actually, I need to do this faith thing by myself, because a lot of university students are like, it's the first time away from home. You either go, my observation when I was at uni is you're going to either respond to that really well, or you're just going to go completely bonkers and just do stuff that you really shouldn't be getting involved with. What was it that caused you? Was there a moment, do you think, or was it like over a period of months where you thought actually to yourself, no, that this is real for me, and I need to sort of, I guess not recommit, do you know what I mean? But just sort of, this is definitely for me. This is the decision moment. Was there such a thing?
There was a couple of things that were really interesting in my journey to uni. Firstly, it was that I really felt like God brought me to Liverpool specifically. So just through the whole application process, it was like all my other options kind of got closed down for different reasons. I mean, the course I wanted to do, it was only available in like Leeds, Liverpool, a few like good unis across the country. And for one reason or another, like the other scenarios where I could go anywhere else other than Liverpool that was like a half decent uni, all shut down. Like a couple of options were rejected and in the UCAS forms, and basically it was like Liverpool or nowhere. And so I kind of remember saying, God, I don't really know what I want to do with my life at age 17. This course looks kind of cool. Liverpool looks kind of cool. I don't know why. I feel quite drawn to it, but if this is it, then great, and if not, I'll just take a gap year and do something totally different. But like, would you just lead me? And and I had to get really high grades. I had to get 2 A's and a B in order to get into my course. It was a really competitive course, so I was like, eek, because well, certainly one of my A levels was history, and I was like predicted a D because I did no work. I didn't really enjoy the subject. So I had some work to pull out to like pull that up, and I ended up getting straight A's. And it just felt like against all the odds, and it just felt like God was like, yeah, 100%, I want you here, I want you on this course. And so it felt like God really put me in Liverpool, not just any old uni. And then secondly, I think the week before I went to uni, one of my youth leaders and friends, she lived down the road from me, an older girl in my church at home had prayed for me that there would be another Christian on my corridor, which when you think statistically, there's not many Christians at university or like openly Christians. And she prayed that like God would just put key people around me, like when I went into halls of residence. And it was really interesting because like 2 doors down, there was another really strong Christian girl who I went to church with. So we kind of dragged each other there and had the same friendship group. And I felt like that was just really God's grace because it made it really easy to go to church and be open about being a Christian from day one. And we both went to Frontline together during our uni years and were able to share quite openly about our faith with some of our other friends that we lived around as well. And the third thing was, and it's quite interesting that we did, it was quite interesting that we talked about Alpha before and how we did Alpha in the summer and Crowd Church, because I kind of came to uni thinking, I really want to know that this faith thing works for me now, like moving away from home, from my parents, from the Christian background I've got. I really want to know that it works in the real world. It was sort of a make or break for me. And I remember thinking, I've never actually really looked at the ins and outs of faith. Like I've just kind of accepted it. And so I actually read the Alpha book in my first term of uni, just to really, not because I didn't believe in God, but just because I wanted to know why I believed what I believed and to really dig a bit deeper into it. So, and I remember doing that and I just nicked it off my dad's bookshelf and took it to uni with me and read through it. And it just, I think it clarified some stuff for me about how I could be sure that what I believed was real and true. And so it was kind of this like sorting it out in my own head, and then also my experience coming alongside that, and then living in halls of residence where lots of people were up to crazy things. Like I hit Liverpool in 1998, and sort of like cream was in its heyday. Every student came to Liverpool because they wanted to go clubbing, basically. I did too, to be fair, but so I was like in this kind of late 90s crazy club culture student experience where everyone just went clubbing on all-nighters on A, and that was just what everyone around me did. And it was quite messy in some ways. And like it was really crystallizing, that whole thing, like that sense of God bringing me there and putting me in Liverpool in that time and that place for a purpose. And some of that is that a couple of friends came to know God in that first year through me and my other friend, and just kind of are being who we are and sort of finding our own feet with God as well. It just felt like it all just came together at the right time, and it just really clicked. And I think that wasn't necessarily what I did, that was God's grace, really.
And so do you think that's you said that when you were praying when you were about 17, you felt God sort of leading you to go to Liverpool. Do you think that's the reason why, when you sort of look back with hindsight, it's easy sometimes to see, isn't it, why God did certain things? And so do you look back now and go, yeah, God, I can see what you were doing. It was great. I got to make friendships. I got to lead some people to Christ. I got established in a local church. It really cemented my faith. And it started a journey where I met my husband. Do you know what I mean? And all those sort of... is that what you mean when you say, God had a plan and a purpose? Is that what you can see in hindsight?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's that sense of like all the other doors I pushed were sort of shut in my face, really. And it just felt really clear like that. I just felt really led down that route, and it's worked out. It's worked out well for me. So, and particularly like for my spiritual growth in those first few years, it really worked out. And so I can kind of sense God's kind of hand over it all. It's like a golden thread that runs through it all, that where you think, this is God. Like it just feels like it had his fingerprints on it. Yeah, that's really interesting. I knew you I think we met when you were doing student work. We must have met at some point when you were at Frontline. I got married in 1998 when you decided to become a student. Yeah. So, there was a slight age difference. You obviously had quite an extraordinary time at university. It really helped cement your faith. And you actually then go on to do student work at church to help students get cemented in their faith.
I'm curious in this because my eldest, Josh, who, if you're familiar with the Crowd live streams, you will have seen him when we used to do the Crowd catch-up. He was on those. And my second eldest child, Zach, he's going to uni in September, right? So in the UK, we do university in September. And by the way, just to say, if you are watching this outside of the UK, when Anna talks about A-levels, it's the exams that we take when we're 18. And the results of those exams determine whether or not you can go to uni. Basically.
They're not even called A-levels, are they, anymore? We're showing our age now. I don't even know what they take anymore. Or is it GCSEs that's changed? I don't know.
It's still A-levels.
Is it still A-levels?
No,
I thought they changed.
Still it's still A-levels. They were talking about this whole baccalaureate system and bringing that in at some point. And I don't know if that ever has, or all I can tell you is Josh and Zach, Josh has done his A-levels. Zach is doing his A-levels. He's taking his exams this year. And he's off to Exeter University, hopefully, and Josh is at St Andrews. You couldn't get further apart in the UK if you tried. I don't know what my boys are trying to tell me, but they are 10 hours apart, which in the UK is huge, let me tell you. Huge. Anyway, back to my original train of thought here. They're going off to uni. It was obviously a very formative time for you. And if I'm honest, uni was an extraordinarily formative time for me. That's where I became a Christian just before going to university. I really cemented my faith at university. It made a massive difference to me. What advice would you give to people who are 18, they're heading off to university? What would you tell them that have grown up in that Christian environment? What sort of tips would you have found helpful?
I guess the things I did find helpful was just that people encouraged me to get plugged into a local church quickly, and just to make sure that I met some Christian friends. I think it can be really hard if you don't have that kind of network. I think that was really key for me. Because I went to a big church like Frontline, I had a lot of good Christian friends, as well as met a lot of good non-Christian friends. And I think without that, it can be really hard, because you feel like, culture's changed a lot in the last 20 years anyway, but I think you feel like you stick out like a sore thumb if you're the only person that you know who's got a faith, and you start to, I think it's probably easy to start thinking, well, why do I believe all this stuff? No one else around me does. Is it just all a bunch of rubbish? They all seem to think it is. And I think it's so important to just to also have those kind of key relationships, a few people where you can be really honest with and meet regularly and pray and chat with, and just talk about faith stuff, because I think it's hard to be, it's not impossible. You can listen to podcasts, you can read your Bible, you can talk to God, but I think it's hard to stay rooted in your faith without being in community with others. So I think, really seeking out other Christians who are students is really important.
Yeah, no, I totally echo that. For me, the big ones were who my friends were, the church that I was involved with, and actually for me, the CU was really good. For a good few years, it really helped me, and it helped me connect with with other Christian friends as well. So, okay, so let's move on from uni. We're going to fast forward a little bit. Let's fill in some of the blanks. So, you end up working at some agencies. You worked with me for a little season, from memory. You worked in one of our little e-commerce businesses. Is that right?
Yeah, I think I did it part-time when I was doing some student work, because I still had to put some bills to pay. So I had to, I did quite a bit of voluntary work for student ministry at church. So then I also had to do some other jobs to make money. So yeah, I did do a little bit of time with you guys, didn't I, with Lutro and some of the e-commerce.
I remember that. No, I do. I remember that. So you, obviously the best job you've ever had. But moving on from that, you worked at a marketing agency. You're back and forth with London, which is where you meet Andy. Now, Andy is your husband now. And through one means or another, Andy decides to move up from London to Liverpool rather than you moving from Liverpool to London. That's probably a whole story in itself, but maybe for another time. How old were you, if you don't mind me asking, when you met Andy?
So when we met, we were both 29 when we first met. And then we got married when I was 33. So obviously it was long distance for quite a while. So that kind of, that kind of courtship, like dating sort of phase was quite slow. But I think some of it was because being long distance, and some of it was because his dad had cancer at the time. And so he might have moved up to Liverpool sooner had his dad not been really ill. So some of that was a bit protracted. But yeah, 29 when we met, so.
Wow. So, and it's interesting because when we were having our little pre-chat about this, one of the things that you said, because we talk about challenges, the key sort of trials that you faced in life, one of which has been the miscarriage and the motherhood, which we're going to get into in a little bit. But one of the things that you said that really stuck out to me was you said, if you asked me that question when I was in my 20s, I would have said singleness. Right? So you didn't start dating until you were 29, Andy. Does that mean you didn't really date in your 20s and you had to sort of somehow figure out this whole singleness thing?
Yeah, I mean, I did have dates, I did see a few people, but I didn't like seriously date anyone. Like I didn't have any serious relationships in my 20s. I think a few people came and went and it just wasn't really a good click. But yeah, most of my 20s I was single, and I think that's probably fairly common experience for women in church. I think either you meet someone quite young when you're a student, or it's quite hard to meet someone a bit later into your 20s, because I think the ratio of male to females in church, particularly young people, is quite an imbalance. I don't know what the statistics are. It's probably like 3-1 or 4-1 or something. I don't know. It certainly felt like that. And also I think for me, I'd been in Frontline for quite a long time. So it was like quite a lot of the guys my age were just quite good friends. And you kind of get past that point of like, meeting someone new, don't you? I suppose you're in the same circle. But yeah, I think it's hard because obviously being a Christian anyway, if you want to meet someone who shares your faith, you want to meet someone in church, then that's a much smaller pool of people. Like I could have met and dated lots of people that I met through work and other parts of my life, but I chose not to do that. So because I wanted someone that shared my faith, because that was a really important part of my life. So yeah, that meant that the pool was a lot smaller to start with, and took quite a bit longer to meet someone that kind of clicked and was a Christian. But I think
that's quite an interesting.
Certainly, I don't think I'm alone in that experience. Like I think I had quite a few other friends who were in a similar position, didn't get married till their 30s, although they would have liked to meet someone at 21. So yeah, I think it is a challenge. I think it's a challenge. It's a challenge for the church about making sure that we care for people who are single as much as married and in families. I think it's easy to feel, particularly as you get into your later 20s and probably even more so into your 30s, it's easy to feel like a bit of a misfit or a bit overlooked. Yeah.
So how did you, I guess, looking back on it now, that sort of that period of singleness, which I don't think it is as much these days, and I could be wrong, and I mean, correct me if I am wrong, but certainly 20 years ago, singleness felt much more, I don't want to use the word frowned upon than it is now, but it was like, people would be kind of like surprised you're single. Why would you be single? Why would? Certainly in the church, right? In the church community, it was one of those expectations that you would just get into a relationship. I think now it feels different. We celebrate singleness now a lot more as an actual a positive thing. And John did a talk actually. What does the Bible say about about marriage and relationships? And he talked about this in there, and I thought that was it was great how he did it. What are some of the things that you have experienced that the church, not Frontline, but do you know what I mean, the church as a whole or Christianity as a whole did that weren't helpful when you were single, if that makes sense? What are some of maybe the wrong expectations it had?
Yeah, I think there was a few things. I think firstly, I think some of the teaching is just unhelpful. Like I've heard preached that you're more blessed if you're married. How's that going to make anyone single in your congregation feel? I actually went up to the pastor after I heard it and said I'd like to disagree. I think that's theological, and I also don't think it's very sensitive. But lots of people would have just sat there and felt awful about themselves. So sometimes the theology and the teaching is just poor on it, and then I think a lot of it is about the culture. So for me, I found the further on I got, the less pool of single friends I had, and the more married couples I had, and I think it's easy to get into this culture where married couples hang out with other married couples, and it's like, and why can't you just also invite a single friend to come and hang out as a 5? Why does it have to be a 4? And I think that kind of culture of just kind of feeling like you can't, I don't know what the barrier was, but quite often just simple things like inviting someone around for lunch, because actually it's really lonely to just go home on your own after church. Simple things like that. I think the church culture could be a lot better at just thinking about single people. And then I think as well, I suppose those main things practically, but I think the other thing is not pressurizing single people, like you say. It's there's times where someone would be like, well, you're single and you obviously want to get married. That's your heart's desire. So how about this guy? How about this guy? How about this guy? And you're like, no, I don't really feel like I connect with those people. They're not really nice guys, but just not really the right person for me, not a good click. And then it'd just be like, well, you're too fussy. It would be like, it's not like they're not God's right match for you. It would always be like, well, it's your fault. You're single then. You're too fussy. You could, there's this guy, it was always just a bit, I don't know, the culture was a bit pressurizing, like just date whoever's there available, just whoever's available. And I don't know, I'm not sure that's always wisdom. And actually I've seen that happen. And then I've seen friends, not necessarily in frontline, but in church generally, jump into relationships quite quickly, quite young, and then be left, by their 30s in horrible divorces and all kinds of mess. And, I sort of think it is good to get married younger. I think singleness is hard, but also it needs to be the right person, and it's better someone doesn't get married than gets married and then ends up in a mess later. And I just, sometimes it always feels like marriage is the goal, and that's not the case, is it? So... And, also
no, and that's very, very wise.
There's this culture of I don't know, marriage is the end goal or something. And anyone who's married, as you and I are, will know it's not. It's just it's just a different aspect of your life, isn't it? There's great things about marriage, but there's also really hard things about being married. And it's not as black and white as singleness is bad, marriage is good. It's, there's good and bad things about both. And for me, my 20s,
I totally agree.
With challenges.
I think for me the thing has always been, actually my life is not about whether I'm single or married. I mean, I am married, so I will stay married. It's about glorifying God, and you can do that whether you're married or single, right? And that's what the Bible talks about. It's the whole reason, your raison d'etre sort of thing. If it's wrapped up in your marital status, is never a good place to be. Where if your identity is wrapped up in Christ and serving Christ and glorifying God and doing that regardless of your marital status, I think that's a good thing. And I do think you're right. I have this whole, you're more blessed if you're married theology. No, we don't hold that true here at Crowd. I just want to point that out. That's not what we think. No. But I do get what you're saying here, because it's easy for me as a married person to go, well, the church just needs to be better at teaching about marriage. But actually what you said there, I find is both helpful and challenging. I personally, what I need to, as a married person, invite single people around to our house and just hang out with them and not be afraid of that,
Yeah. And actually realise they'll probably really appreciate it.
And take much more of an active interest.
And the other thing for me was that...
I think you're right.
Yeah, and the other thing for me was that there was some really great things about being single in my 20s. Some aspects were challenging, but then I also got to live in I lived really intentionally for a few years in my 20s in a big house, so like shared house with 9 people. And like a few of us were Christians who went to Frontline and a few of us weren't. And like 3 of those people that weren't originally Christians became Christians. And I don't like over a sort of 2 or 3 year period of like living with them and like investing in their lives daily and just in friendship and being up close. And I don't think, since being married and in a nuclear family like I am now, I don't think I've seen that in my life again. Like I was able to live with and shape and disciple and share my faith day to day with people in a way that I don't now do because I've got my own, husband and child. So yeah, there's things about that stage of life that are so unique, and I think there's actually stuff that God did in that stage that actually wouldn't have happened had I got married at 21. So I think it's really important that as a church we kind of empower and encourage people to be their full selves as well in singleness and to fully embrace what God wants to do in that stage of their life as something really special, something that they won't necessarily have again later. Like I don't think I'll get another chance to do that kind of thing. And yeah, it was a really exciting time.
That's really, really good. That's really good. And again, it comes down to, glorifying God, whatever you're doing, and just, seeking God's best, doesn't it? So if we move on from your 20s, you get married to Andy, who's a top bloke, by the way. You get married to Andy. And so then your next big trial, apart from, the whole marriage thing, which, that is a whole learning curve. We'll maybe save that for another day. You said that motherhood for you was a massive transition. Why? I mean, apart from the obvious reasons, why was that such a huge deal for you?
For me, actually getting married felt quite natural, and I think maybe that's another great thing about doing it a bit later. Like, it actually felt like a quite easy click. Like, some people say beginning of marriage is really hard, and I found it was quite easy. I think it was when we had Ben, our little boy, that it became more tricky because we were tired and we were a bit shell-shocked and a bit more stressed with this new baby who never stopped crying, and had like a few health complications at the beginning as well. I think that was kind of much more of a stretching time like for us. I think so we had Ben in 2015, so he's 6 now, he's coming around 7 soon, and he was born with some health complications. Like, he was born by emergency C-section, and he was born kind of with his head was like kind of basically permanently squashed like that when he came out, so he couldn't like straighten his neck, which meant he had some like delays in terms of developmental delays. He like walked late, he sat late, he crawled late all because of postural stuff. So it got corrected over time with physio. We had like a few hairy months where he had to like have MRIs at Alder Hay and lots of checks to make sure there was nothing else going wrong, like brain damage or anything like that. But he was fine. And it corrected itself over time. Like, you wouldn't necessarily know that about him now. But he also had some like developmental delays in terms of language and other behavioural stuff, and got put on what's called the autism spectrum disorder pathway, ASD pathway. So he's still going through process on that actually, for assessing like neurodiversity in him. So he's a brilliant kid, but he's also quite he can be quite a handful at times. He's quite he's got a big heart and he's got a lot of energy, and he takes a lot of energy to parent. So that, I suppose, becoming a parent was a big shock to us in terms of like it always is anyway. And then I think we had a son who had some extra complications quite early on into parenthood. So that was I guess no parent ever expects any difficulties. They just expect their child to just come out and just fit the norm. And if a child has any neurodiversity or kind of developmental problems or anything else. It's, physical problems, whatever. It's just a shock. You don't expect it. And so, yeah, that was stuff we had to deal with. And then, but, we were incredibly blessed to have him. And then 2 years later, we sort of decided we'd extend our family and try and have a sibling for him. We got pregnant straight away again. So we had Ben fairly quickly, and we got pregnant again fairly quickly. And so we just thought, oh yeah, this is fine. I think I was like 36 or 37 by then. By today's standards, that's not particularly old to have a second child. But yeah, I had an early miscarriage, but just around Christmas time. So I got pregnant in the autumn, and it was around Christmas time. So it was probably around 8 or 9 weeks. And yeah, it was just, I suppose for me, it was a big shock. It's always a big shock, I think, miscarriage for any woman. It was really sad, and it was especially sad because it happened just before Christmas, and both my sisters had had kids the same year that we'd had Ben, and then they were pregnant again, and we were like, brilliant, we're going to have more cousins at the same time. And Andy's sister, actually, Jane, his older sister, was also expecting a child the same week, literally the same week that we were due. So we were kind of like, this is perfect, it's so exciting. And then kind of the disappointment of like, oh, it's not happening for us, but it is for everyone else in the family around us, was really hard. So that Christmas was tough, but like kind of once we got through it, we were like, well, we'll move on, we'll heal, we'll try again in a few months' time, and sure, it'll be fine next time. I'd got other friends who'd had miscarriages and chatted to them a bit, and kind of, it's sad miscarriage, but it happens to 1 in 4 pregnancies. So I knew it was common going into pregnancy. It can happen to any woman, and it's more frequent than people talk about. And so I just thought, well, it's sad, but it's one of those things, and next time it'll be fine. So that was kind of our introduction to parenthood, and then second parenthood. And then kind of we had a few months gap, and then tried again, and then miscarried quite quickly again with the second one, like less than 6 months later. And that was the real shock, because I thought, although miscarriage is quite common, like 2 miscarriages in a row are really rare. Like when you talk to any health professionals after miscarriage, they say, don't worry about it, it's really common, you can try again straight away, it rarely happens twice, next time will be fine. That's all people tell you after a miscarriage, pretty much. So statistically it's unusual to have 2 in a row. So yeah, that was really hard, because it was like kind of this first inkling of like, oh, that's not normal, like there might be something else going on here. Especially because Ben had some health complications late that were they thought were maybe caused late into the pregnancy, like some placental growth problems at the end of my pregnancy with him. So because of that, they kind of looked at it all at Liverpool Women's Hospital, our local hospital, and sort of said, we should look into this more, because when you look at your pregnancy with Ben and then 2 recurrent miscarriages after it, there might be something going on here that's a pattern. So yeah, that was kind of a shocking introduction into trying to expand our family. Yeah. And then
that's really harsh. I mean,
yeah, it was a lot, and it was a lot to kind of go from thinking everything's fine, and of course we'd have a second baby, and then within that 6-month period being sat in front of consultants of the women's. It was quite a short period, really. It was like within that sort of December to like the following summer. By that point we'd found ourselves in front of specialist consultants in recurrent miscarriage, saying we need to run some tests for like rare diseases and genetic problems and all kinds. And it was just a bit like, okay, this is not how we thought parenthood was going to go. It's definitely not how we thought expanding our family was going to go. So no. Yeah, that season was really hard. I think we come back, obviously go through the grief of a miscarriage anyway, and then we had it's like grief on top of grief to have 2 miscarriages back to back, and you've not really got over the first one, and then you're grieving again, and then you're also hit with all this kind of shock of like, all right, there could actually be something more going on here as well that we might have to deal with. And this is not suddenly that realization that parenthood and expanding your family is not going to be a smooth ride. Yeah, that was hard.
Wow. Wow. And I mean, your talk that you did, what does the Bible say about grief? You draw on your story a lot when you talk about these sort of principles that you learned during this time of grieving the loss of the two miscarriages, the two babies. And alongside that, as well as the babies, there's a loss of the dreams, isn't there? The plans, the hopes, and there's the life, and things are now changing, and they're not great. Can I ask, did you're sort of sat in front of the consultants, you're doing all these tests? Did you then try again, or was that the end of the road?
Yeah, so they kind of ran a load of tests. They do lots of blood tests and different samples. They run for loads of rare diseases that cause miscarriage in some instances. And they kind of basically ruled out anything that they were looking for. I think miscarriage is tricky in that most cases of miscarriage and infertility as well actually are undiagnosed and undiagnosable. Like, they don't know why they happen, in other words, medically speaking. But there are some rare diseases, blood disorders, kind of, those kind of things that can cause some of them. So they ruled all that out and said, we can't find anything. So the best thing to do is just kind of try again if you want to and see what happens. And I think this is the thing about recurrent miscarriage, that no one can really tell you if they can't find a cause, which is most instances, I think, then all they can really say is just keep trying for as long as you want to, as many times as you want to, and hope that one sticks, hope that one baby, just sticks around. And and there's not really a lot more they can do. There's a bit more science to it in terms of, like, they can encourage you to kind of take certain drugs that are supposed to improve the embedding process in the womb and that kind of stuff in those early weeks. For me, they had this theory that it was probably because they ruled out like any kind of rare diseases and those kind of genetic disorders and stuff, that they said, based on Ben's condition as well when he was born, that they thought it was to do with a placental growth thing and maybe an embedding issue in the womb, something to do with like the way how well my womb was working and growing. So yeah, that was the theory. It's normally a DNA thing, or it's an embedding thing, or it's like rare disease with a mum, but they don't really know for sure. But it's all a bit of guesswork, 'cause no way of really knowing. And you meet some women who have like miscarried 5 or 10 times, because they just keep trying. Wow. And for us, we tried a third time, and we got quite far. We saw the baby's heartbeat at 8.5 weeks. Everything looked good. I had no bleeding that time. And I think I was 39 by this point. And so and we just felt like this is probably the one. This is it. In fact, we'd had a couple of words of knowledge before we got pregnant, from people who didn't necessarily even know our situation. So for a number of reasons, we thought like this was it, and God was going to give us this baby. And then we saw the heartbeat at 8.5 weeks. It looked really healthy. We were like, yep, this is great. Normally I would be miscarrying by now. And then we went for the 12-week scan, and I'd had a silent miscarriage, which is effectively like you turn up to the scan all excited like parents always are, and then they say, sorry, there's no heartbeat. So your body just hasn't realised it's not pregnant yet. The hormones are still going. There's been no bleeding. So basically your body's still holding the pregnancy. So you don't know. There's no indication that you've lost it. And I think that's how a lot of miscarriages happen, actually. But yeah, so we found that out, and that was obviously a huge shock. It was really devastating. And yeah, the only thing about that was because I'd had a silent miscarriage, or missed miscarriage as they call them sometimes. They said that they could take a DNA sample, like from the pregnancy remains, because they have to remove it by operation. So yeah, they sent some samples off and got it tested in the lab, like the DNA and stuff, and it came back. Took a few months, but it came back, and basically it confirmed that it was a healthy baby girl and that there was no DNA problems. So that kind of for us ruled out the other thing, which is like sometimes, particularly as you get older, that can just be like, you know, some people say, oh, miscarriage is the best because, you know, maybe there's something wrong with the baby anyway. And that can be a factor in some instances. Like there's there's too many, the gene sequence is wrong. There's too many or not enough. I don't know. I'm not a specialist in genes, but you know that, yeah. But basically, that ruled that out. So it was most likely that it was an embedding problem for me, by deduction. So they said, right, try and get pregnant again, and here's a pile of drugs to try and help that embedding process. Take progesterone every day because high levels of progesterone are good. Take heparin, which thins your blood, because that's good. And so yeah, I had to like inject daily heparin injections, use pessaries and all kinds. It was quite invasive. And so we did that for a number of months on a number of cycles and just never got pregnant again. So I think for us, it was like it was a shame because we were just getting somewhere, and then we hit a wall where it's like, we've hit the end of our fertility. Like some people that happens slightly later, some slightly earlier, but normally around 40, it becomes quite difficult to get pregnant naturally again. I know it can happen. I've had friends who've had babies into their 40s, but it didn't happen for us. Everyone's slightly different. So yeah, we talked to some fertility experts at Liverpool Women's, and they said we could try IVF. And actually we had all the tests ran, and they said our fertility looked pretty good for our age, and that actually IVF would probably harvest us, you know, a good number of eggs and probably a good shot at further pregnancies if we wanted to do it. I think for us by that point, it was like Ben was, you know, kind of 5.5, 6, I can't even remember. And yeah, it felt like quite a big gap, and also it felt like quite a big risk in terms of if we had just been an infertile couple that can get pregnant, then that would have been a good shot for us. But what they were saying was this would get you pregnant, but it wouldn't change your risk of miscarrying again. So you could spend $6,000 on IVF cycles each time and still miscarry 6 weeks or 8 weeks later, and we can't really do anything about that part. So for us, we just we wrestle with it, and we held it before God, and you know, I think Andy in particular, my husband, was kind of just felt like we'd been through enough as a couple already, and that we'd been through a lot of loss and grief, and how much more did we want to put on ourselves. And it just felt like ever decreasing odds of success as we got older, and ever higher kind of I don't know, cost, and not just the physical cost of IVF but emotional cost as well, to us and to our family. And so we kind of said we'll not pursue it, and if God gives us another pregnancy, so that's great, and if he doesn't, then so be it. And actually for me, I prayed quite a number of times. I said, God, like, I only want to get pregnant again if this baby's going to stay. I don't want to just go through miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage like some women do, because I just didn't want to be stuck in that grief cycle. It's just really hard, and it's just, I don't know, it's just not how you want to spend 5 or 10 years of your life, if you can help it. So yeah, and that was like during lockdown that we were getting all that IVF and fertility advice. So for a while we had quite a big gap because services were closed during lockdowns, and then sort of came out of that and made that decision. And then obviously that was about a year ago, so we're about a year on now, and not saying God can't do it, but it's probably unlikely in the natural. So that's where we are now. We're kind of open to the fact God could do it, but also realistic about the fact that that's probably our opportunity to grow our family naturally. Been and gone. Probably had our best shots at it. So yeah, it's kind of it's hard. It's hard infertility because it's like there's no absolute closure. It's like it could happen, and no one medically will ever tell you it can't, because it can, but it's like ever less likely as you get older. So yeah, so that's where we are now.
Thank you for sharing, Anna, the story. And it's I'm sitting here listening to you, and I know the story, but it's still heartbreaking to hear it. If I'm honest with you, and it's heartbreaking listening to what you're saying. And so, goodness knows what you and Andy have gone through, right? I mean, the whole grief and the devastation, the emotion with all of that. I guess if I sit here and I listen to you, and I'm kind of going, what would be the question, I guess, if I was listening to this and I didn't know the story and I didn't know you? What would one of the questions I'd want to ask? And I guess one of them for me would be, where was God in this, right? Because you're a Christian. This is a church podcast. Yet here's your life with heartbreak and devastation and loss. But you're a Christian. So where was God in all of this, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And it's one I've asked lots of times. I think, where is God in it? I think God's probably right with us, weeping, kind of grieving with us, holding us. I think miscarriage isn't God's plan. I don't think, you do hear some strange teaching sometimes about everything happens for a reason, everything happens, maybe it was for the best or whatever. And I don't believe that. I don't believe that death and sickness and disease in any form or shape, and that includes miscarriage, is ever part of God's plan. In fact, I think, that the kind of key for me was looking at right back in Genesis at the beginning of the creation story. And when you look at like Adam and Eve and the fall, one of the direct consequences of the fall was it says for the woman that there'll be difficulty in childbirth. And I don't think that just means that childbirth will hurt. I think that means there'll be difficulty in having children and having family. And I think you can see that in all forms of infertility, and motherhood's hard even with the children you do have, as I've alluded to with Ben. I think the struggle in all parenthood, isn't there, and all motherhood, whether you get to have the children that you want or not. And for me, that's all wrapped up in the fact that it wasn't God's intention for us. And so for me, that was my starting place theologically. It's like, well, I don't believe that this is from God. I believe that this is a result of this broken, messy, fallen world that we live in. So that was the first part of it. And then where do I believe God is in the middle of it? He's with us because he promises to be with us in our grief and to draw near those who are brokenhearted. And then where is it all heading? I believe he's with us in terms of this bigger picture of God working through time to redeem all things. And that actually, although as Christians we want all the outcomes now, we pray for health on earth, we pray for blessings now, we pray for babies, we pray for, business success, we pray for all these things now. Those things that are broken and stay broken on this earth, I do believe get resolved in heaven, in eternity with God. And that actually, for me, that's my only hope. I don't know where the hope is in stories of miscarriage and infertility if you don't believe in God. Some people say, I don't know how you can believe in God and go through all that. But I don't know how you can go through all that and not believe in God, because to me, it's like, if I didn't have my faith, where else would I go with it? It's just hopeless. And I would much rather walk through this with the hope of eternity and the fact that God promises to make everything right one day. I don't know how that looks exactly, but I do believe that, children that are miscarried or, stillborn or lost later into life, I believe they'll all be, all of that will be restored and made right in heaven. And that's the kind of hope that we've been able to cling on to. So I guess for me, faith and where is God in it is that he's been the only hope in the midst of something that's been quite a difficult, painful and dark season at times. He's been the kind of hope in it all. There's that verse, I can't remember where it's from in the Bible exactly, but where one of the disciples says, where else would we go, Lord? Where else would we go? Like, we don't have anywhere else to go except you. And it is kind of that thing for me. It's like, well, to who else would I go? Where else would I go if not to Jesus? I don't have another solution that makes this right. Medicine can't fix it.
Yeah.
Clever thinking can't fix it. Self-help doesn't fix it. So for me, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it.
That's super inspirational, and I mentioned this before. The people that I find the most inspiring in life are the people that have gone through trials, that have gone through tragedy, that have gone through dark times, but they emerge just the sweetest, loveliest people. And that would, in my head, that's you and Andy. And with everything that you've gone through, that I can't imagine, you still emerge like this, and it's inspiring. And I'm not being flippant when I say that. It's a genuine belief. One of the things that you said to me, which I found quite interesting, and I wrote it down. You said, hope can't be in the outcome, it has to be in God, and faith isn't about everything going your way, which sounds a bit like that's what's come out of this story.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I think we can easily think, certainly this is how I grew up thinking, because I had quite an easy life, growing up, and quite a straightforward childhood, and nothing major rocked my world, until I kind of hit my 20s, maybe with a little bit with singleness and some of that stuff we talked about, but then more so in this scenario with motherhood and miscarriage and infertility. For me, it's like the first time where it's like, oh right, just because I'm a Christian, it doesn't just automatically guarantee me a good life where everything goes right. And that's really hard, and it brings up some big questions that you really have to wrestle with. And it's like, I think, I've kind of always believed, just by default, no one's taught me this, but I think just by default that life's been quite easy up till then. I've just kind of equated that with like, well, that's because I'm a Christian and God's blessing my life. But actually, when those things don't go well, that throws that theology out of the window pretty fast. And and I don't think that's biblical at all. I don't know where it comes from. Is it just based on experience, or is it bad teaching in churches? I don't know, but it's not theological. Like Jesus said, like, we will have trouble in this life. He didn't say you'd take it away and make it all better for us. He said he'd be with us in it. And that's been my experience. He's not taken the hard things away. He's not made them easy. He's not healed them all, but he has been with us in it. So we've not been without hope. And we felt carried in a way that, some of the stuff that I've been through, if you'd asked me before I'd been through it, I would have said I couldn't deal with that. I couldn't cope with that. I would walk away from my faith, and it would just break me. I couldn't do that. Couldn't do that, God. But having done it and walked through it with God, it's like, it makes me realize that actually that's where, like face tested in hard things, isn't it? But actually that's where it really comes into its own. And actually I've encountered God in a much deeper way because I've needed to wrestle with all of those questions, and I've needed him in a deeper way, and I've needed to find him in a more real way, in a more urgent kind of way. So yeah, it's kind of, it's weird. The thing that you would think like pain and suffering would break your faith has actually kind of been another thing that's really made it, or reshaped it, and actually, has deepened it in some ways. Like I feel like, I don't know, you shouldn't say this, should you? Because you don't want to test the theory, but I don't know if anything could break my faith now, because the worst has already happened. It's like the thing no woman wants to happen has happened. The thing I said I would hate that, I can never deal with that, has already happened. And I'm not saying therefore life won't throw more bad stuff at, life can throw hard things at any of us at any time. And and I think you're right. It's like we don't get to choose it. We're not in control. We like to think we are, but we're not. And actually faith doesn't put us back in control. God's still, you know, God's still in control, and actually just because we pray hard or want something enough doesn't change the outcomes. Sometimes it does, but often it doesn't, and that's okay. And I think sometimes God's got more to do when the outcomes don't change as well.
No, it's very wise, very, very wise. And I'm just aware of time. I feel like we could talk about this a whole great deal longer. Yeah. Let's just close out with this one thing. We talked about this before. I said to you, I asked you this question. I don't know if you remember. If there was one piece of advice that you would give to Ben that you would want him to know growing up, what would it be? Your answer was, it's not a bad thing to have plans for life. Just hold them lightly. And I love this phrase that you came up with, write them in pencil.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's been the big lesson for me. It's like, I thought I'd get married at 21, I'd have a family at 25, I think our culture sells us this thing of like life just, it's like this kind of, path, and it's so clearly defined for us of how life should look. And if that's what you buy into or are taught growing up, and then things deviate in different ways, whether that's like miscarriage or a cancer diagnosis or long-term singleness, or just something happens that doesn't go to the plan, we find that really difficult. And actually God's got so many different plans for our lives, and even if something goes off plan, he's so able to redeem it. And that's why I say kind of hold your plan. It's not wrong to have plans. It's great to have ideas for how you'd like things to be. It's great to dream and have vision for the future, isn't it? But just hold them lightly, because when things don't go to plan, it's really disappointing. And it's much easier if you're holding them lightly to just adjust and reframe and think, okay, well, that wasn't what I wanted. Like for me, my 30s didn't really go as I wanted them to. Motherhood it didn't pan out the way I expected. I expected to have a house full of several kids by now, and that to be the thing that was consuming all my time. And that hasn't happened. But then I think I've got a lot of life ahead of me still. So it's a case of like pivot. And okay, so motherhood didn't look quite how I expected it to. And my family isn't quite as full as I expected it to be. But what else, Lord? Like, what now? What's next? And also are there other ways to lean into those things as well that aren't just like about a nuclear biological family? That could be fostering in the future. It could be having lodgers like you do, Matt. I know it could be just having an open house and having people to stay short term. Could just be like living in community with others. We can think of things in a really narrow way, and like maybe God's view of the world is just so much broader than like sort of our narrow view of like what our life path should look like. And we kind of have this narrow kind of picture, and he's like, no, it's so much broader and wider than that. And I think there's other things that I wouldn't have been doing had all this stuff not happened. So we'd be doing podcasts like this about faith and miscarriage and life with you. I wouldn't be writing books. I wouldn't have set up a network for women who are dealing with miscarriage and infertility in our area. It's that thing of what's next. And if you write things on pencil, they're easy to rub out and slightly rewrite. And so that would be my advice. It would be, be willing to pivot and not be too rigid about how life's going to look, because you can't plan these things.
Fantastic. Well, Anna, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your story. It's been wonderful to chat with you. And if you're watching the podcast or listening to the podcast, however you're consuming this consuming this content, if anything has connected with you or touched you, or you want to reach out, you want someone to pray with you, you want to just talk through some stuff, you can reach us at Crowd Church or via our WhatsApp number. We would love to hear from you. And let us know also what you think about the Stories podcast, this new form of content that we're putting out there. We're going to be putting more stuff out, talking to more amazing people just like Anna, digging into their stories and finding out how faith has affected them in the real world. So do make sure you like and subscribe and all of that good stuff to stay with us on the content. But for now, from myself and my incredibly brave and inspiring guest, Anna Kettle, thank you so much for joining us. Bless you, and I look forward to our next hosting together.
Definitely, yeah, I look forward to it soon. It's fun.
So there you have it. What a great story. Huge thanks again to Anna for joining me today. Start that sentence again. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from, because we have even more stories coming up of faith and courage from everyday people lined up. They're all there, and we don't want you to miss any of them. So make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. And also, while you're there, subscribe to the Crowd Church live stream, or like it, follow and all that good stuff. Come say hi in the comments. We live stream 6 p.m. every Sunday from the UK, which is 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time most of the time, give or take the strange clock changes. And if you want to know what time that is for you in your country, on the website, we've got a great link which will tell you what time that broadcast is. Do come and join us. And in case no one has told you today, you, my friend, are awesome. Yes, you are. Utterly, utterly awesome. It's just the way that God's made you, if I'm honest. The Bible says that we have been fearfully and wonderfully made. So, you know what? As I like to say, it's a burden we all have to carry. You are awesome. Now, What's the Story is produced by Crowd Church, and you can find our entire archive of episodes on your favourite podcast app. And the team that makes this show possible is Sadaf Bainon, George McQuaig, Estelle Robin, and Tim Johnson. Our theme song is written by Josh Edmondson. And if you would like to read the transcript or show notes, head over to the website www.crowd.church, where you can also sign up for our newsletter.